Welcome student. Today we will discuss about request dispatcher. Request dispatcher is a one type of interface which is used to dispatch the request from one page to another. Request dispatcher interface provides the facility of dispatching the request to another resource. Resource may be HTML, Servlet or JSP. It is a basically interface which has contained in Java x.servlet.requestDispatcher interface. This interface can also be used to include the content of another resource. It is one of the way of Servlet collaboration, so it is known also as Servlet collaboration. The getRequestDispatcher method of Servlet request interface returns the object of request dispatcher. So to implement that particular object, request dispatcher has two methods which is included in Servlet context. Those two methods are getRequestDispatcher and getNamedDispatcher. GetRequestDispatcher takes a string argument describing a path within the scope of the Servlet context. This path must be relative to the root of the Servlet context, and it is used to look up a Servlet, wrap it with a request dispatcher object and return it, while getNamedDispatcher method takes a string argument indicating the name of the Servlet known to as Servlet context. If a Servlet is known to the Servlet context by the given name, it is wrapped within a request dispatcher object and returned. Now we see the syntax of request dispatcher. Here is the basic syntax of request dispatcher method. So first method is getRequestDispatcher. Here we pass one parameter as a string. So for example, here we create request dispatcher object RD, and to fetch that particular object or resource we use request implicit object and call getRequestDispatcher method. Here we pass Servlet2 as a parameter, and then after we use forward method. This is a sub method of getRequestDispatcher. There are two methods basically, forward and include, which is mapped with request dispatcher object. So we write rd.forward request, response. Now we see the methods defined in the request dispatcher interface. There are two methods, void forward method and void include method. Void forward method has two parameters, request and response, which is basically owned by Servlet request class and Servlet response class respectively. This method throws also exception, which is same as Servlet's service method, like Servlet exception and IO exception. It forwards a request from a Servlet to another resource, that may be Servlet, JSP or HTML file on the server which you want to forward your particular request. Second method is include method, which is same as forward method. It takes two parameters, request and response, basically owned by Servlet request class and Servlet response class, and it also throws exception, Servlet exception and IO exception. Include method includes the content of a resource, that is Servlet page, JSP page or HTML page in the response. So these two methods used in request dispatcher interface. Now we discuss in deeply forward and include method. Here is the structure of forward method. How forward method work. First of all, web client send a request. So here is the first step, that as you see in the figure, that response of a second servlet is sent to the client. Response of the first servlet is not displayed to the user. So first of all, here web client sent a request to the servlet 1. Servlet 1 execute that request and generate some response. Now servlet 1 send another request using forward method to servlet 2 class, or we can say that servlet 2 file, and pass that or forward that request to servlet, another servlet. So here in step 2 method, forward method is called and particular request and response object or data is passed to servlet 2 file. Now servlet 2 file execute that request and generate some response. So in the step 3, some response is generated, and that is the final output or final response which is generated, and it is sent back to our client or user. It allows a servlet to serve as a request processor. Forward may not be called if data has been sent to the client. Forward method calls the response.reset method to clear the output buffer. In query parameters also are added to the original query parameters. The new URI values are based on the request dispatcher URI. It means when servlet 1 is executed and some response is generated, the response is not seen to the user. It is sent back new request to servlet 2, but here the parameter which is passed in forward method as request and response are same as which is passed in first request. So the particular request is sent by servlet 1 is just passing, or we can say the forward another request to servlet 2 file, and servlet 2 file is generate some response, final response, and it sent back to that response to web client. For example, here we create request dispatcher object RD. Now you also send servlet file or some HTML file or JSP file as another request form. In this, we forward the request to servlet 2 file as a first example, and in second example we forward our request to form.html page. Now we see the include method. As we see in the figure that first of all, web client sent a request to servlet 1. Servlet 1 generate some response. It is particular response is sent to the servlet 2 using include method. Servlet 2 page execute that request and response is generated is sent back to the servlet 1. It means we can say that servlet 2 file is executed and the response is included in servlet 1's response. After executing all the task or all the process, servlet 1 is sent the response to the web client. So final response is sent back to the client from servlet 1. Response of the second servlet is included in the response of the first servlet. that is being sent to the client. This method is used to include some content to the response after the response has been initiated by opening a print writer or Servlet output stream back to the client machine. The request and response must be either the same object that passes to the service method. In both method, forward and include method, it must be same the request and response object which is forwarded to the another resource or another page in request dispatcher task. Here is the example of include method. First of all, we create request dispatcher object RD. Using get request dispatcher, we fetch another resource. Here is Servlet 2 and we use include method. So we just write rd.include and pass two parameters as a request and response. In second example, we call just form.html page using get request dispatcher and that execution is added into our current page using rd.include method. Now we see another example. In this, first we create one form in HTML. In this, we add two entities as a login ID and password and one submit button. After clicking the submit button, the request is passed to the call_servlet.java file. So next we create call_servlet.java file. It is a Servlet file, so we just create a class as named as call_servlet and extend it using HTTP Servlet class. In this class, we use doPost method and add two parameters HTTP Servlet request object and HTTP Servlet response object, which throws two exceptions, Servlet exception and IO exception. Then after we just set content type as a response text or HTML. Then after we create print writer object and fetch that particular output data using getWriter method of response class, response object. Then after we create request dispatcher object RD. To fetch form data, we use getParameter method using request object. So using request.getParameter, we set the two string value login and password. Then after we check that particular credential is satisfied or not. So particular if login name is DSTC and password is MCA, then after request is forwarded to the forward demo page. Otherwise it is print out as incorrect login ID password, and it is used that we use just both method forward and include. If you successfully log in, then forward method is invoked and forward demo page is displayed. But if you correctly not entered login ID and password, then particular form which you entered is included in your current page. So we use that particular page using request dispatcher include method. So here we add request dispatcher method in include method or set form1.html. Here is forward demo.java class. In this class we just print that particular user login name or username using login parameter and print out as welcome username, that which is entered by user in form. Then after we just create redirect.java file. Here we use send redirect method. Now request dispatcher has two methods, forward and include method, which is just dispatch the request to another resources, which may be Servlet, JSP or HTML. Send redirect method is also done same process, but there is some difference. So we create some example. That in this example we create one class redirect and it extends HTTP Servlet class. Then after we just use some login ID and password, which is same as entered in form.html file. Using request.get parameter, we fetch that both entity and store in login and password string. Then after we again apply some credentials, that if login ID is Java and password is Servlet, then after response.send redirect method is called and welcome page is displayed. Otherwise your request is redirect to your login page, which is defined as redirect.html page in this example. So in both example we just dispatch our request. In first example we use request dispatcher and its two method, forward and include, while in this example we use send redirect method. So what is send redirect method? The send redirect method is method of HTTP Servlet response interface. It can be used to redirect response to another resource, which is same as Servlet, JSP or HTML file. The syntax of send redirect method is void send redirect, and we have to pass one string parameter which throws also IO exception. For example, there are three ways to pass the string parameter in send redirect method. In first example we pass normal just particular link. So we enter http://www.google.com. In second example we set relative path to send that particular request using send redirect method. So we write response.send redirect and pass the parameter in double quotation as form.html. We also can send parameter as absolute path. So we enter that particular path in browser, which is entered same as in parameter. So this is same as absolute path, http://localhost:8080 form.html. You can use any type of way to use the send redirect method. Now there are some difference between forward method and send redirect method. First of all, forward method is the method of request dispatcher interface, while the send redirect method is HTTP Servlet response interface method. In forward method, that we know that particular output which is generated by first Servlet, it is not visible to the client, while in send redirect method redirection happens at client end and it's visible to client. Forward method is faster compared to redirect method. Send redirect method is slower than a forward since it requires two browser requests, one for actual request and another for redirected request. In case of forward method, original URL remains unaffected, while in send redirect that original request is changed and new request is created and the original URL is modified in send redirect method. The request is transferred to other resource within same server, thus it can be used within the server. While in send redirect method, request may be transferred to other resources to different server, and it can be used within or we can also use outside the server. Request dispatcher object, when we call that particular forward method, it passes the request and response object. So our old request object and response object is present on our new resources, which is going to process our request, while in send redirect method, old request and response object is lost because it is treated as a new request in the browser. So every time new request is created and it is executed to that another resources, while in forward and include method, not new request is created but it is modified and we just pass that particular data using that same object to another resource. So this is the difference between forward method and send redirect method, and this is the overall working of request dispatcher. Thank you.